Jordan B. Peterson. He's probably one of the most famous intellectuals in the world now. He's a clinical psychologist. He taught at Harvard and then at the University of Toronto, where he's tenured. He wrote the books Maps of Meaning. Maps of Meaning is like a Jungian kind of inspired book where he talks about everything in the world and the universe as being archetypal and whatever. And that was really theoretical and, a little bit, what's the word? Soft. But then he wrote the bestseller 12 Rules for Life, which was completely practical and, age-old psychological concepts, many of which you and I will agree with. And now he's writing a sequel to that because it became an international bestseller called 12 More Rules for Life, a QED to the first book. He also wrote the introduction to the updated 2020 version of Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. Jordan Peterson, he was pretty well known in the academic circles, but he rose to prominence because of his unwillingness to act in accordance with Bill C-16, which is a Toronto mandate that compels professors, people in businesses, to call all people by their preferred pronouns. And then failure to do so results in fines or jail time even for continued offenses. Peterson says, he's never had any problem calling people by their preferred pronouns, especially if it's in earnest. Instead, he was opposed to the compelled speech aspect. But we're not going to talk about that. It's just a little background about who he is. So
he became a kind of a non-PC guy.
Exactly, a free speech
warrior, non-PC guy. And he has a little bit of an image of being a retro around male-type issues.
Yeah, that's true. So he became famous in earnest and to his liking. He manufactured this a little bit. That gave him a little jump. People knew who he was. But public opinions were initially split between conservatives and liberals, like a lot of other things. So he won half the crowd that was watching at that point. Most conservatives seeing them as one of him. But it turns out he'd been recording all of his lectures for years, and they're on YouTube. And he speaks very carefully. He's a very brilliant guy and a really nuanced perspective on just about everything. He's all over the political spectrum. He's a truth seeker, really. You might agree or not agree with any one thing that he says, but he's given it his best to try to discern ground truth about things. Being that he was all the news right now, millions of people started watching his YouTube videos to see what he was all about. So he figured, okay, they have these videos, but they're all college lectures. Maybe not everyone wants to watch those. So I thought I'll use that viewership to give people some practical psychological advice as well as like theoretical, wisdom that he could impart. And that was really helpful to building him up. Not, all of a sudden, tens of millions, more than that, were watching him and talking about him. And a lot of his advice that he newly put on YouTube it turned out to be, kind of de facto. I don't know if he knew for sure he was talking to these people, but the people who thrived on it and really liked his psychological advice and musings are the kind of people who you and I talk about a lot and who AOC is worried about, which tend to be, people in inner cities or people in Appalachia, and a lot of them male and impoverished and lack education and who are trying to put themselves back together or live in this world. So that's what inspired his book, 12 Rules for Life. So what does it have to do with addiction? And what does it have to do with the standard stories that everybody can't help but tell, even when they're brilliant people who should know better? Peterson doesn't talk much about addiction, but he's dealt with a lot of, he deals with people who have addictions in his clinical work. And he has a lot of practical insights about them. One being, since we talked about trauma, his perspective on trauma really is that, like us, that, okay, a trauma's happened. So what? You can't magically go back and make it not happen. You can't give somebody a lobotomy, make them forget about it. The practical thing to do is use that experience to build on your present and your future. So that's one thing that let's leave that aside for now. In terms of addiction, he says similar things that we do. Addictions aren't limited to drugs. Solving addiction problems is much more than just abstinence or just living by a series of prohibitions, like can't do this drug, can't see these people. It's about expanding your life space. I have a note in here that he's never mentioned you directly, but I've seen videos and read things that he's written, and I have to imagine that he's at least aware of you, and probably some of his ideas are inspired by things that you've written. I have to look closer to see if he's cited you anywhere. From all of this, he actually created a program. It's like LPP. It's like Diet LPP, which is called the Future Authoring Program, or the Self-Authoring Program, or something like that. And it's a suite of programs that helps people. There's 3 different ones. You write about your past, write about your present, write about the future, and it's all in one. And it's basically like our
We do that story in the LPP.
Right, exactly. His is not coach-led or support or anything like that, but it is just giving people a little guidance about how they might write their prologue, how they might talk about what their experiences are now, and then really help people set goals. And, you know, it's probably pretty effective, and he's sold a lot of it. But it's nothing. I've gone and looked at it, and our partner Dahi in Ireland, I've had him jump on and look at it too. It's psychologically relevant and probably does help people, but it's nothing like our program. But still, that captures the spirit of where his mind's at. But even though he has all those sort of brilliant and practical ideas, he has some really incomplete or sometimes bizarre or strange views about addiction as well. So, for instance, he said that, you know, when asked about it, he'll say alcohol is addictive because people develop physical dependence on it, and once they have that tolerance, well, then it turns into a destructive cycle because they need more to get that feeling out of it, and so on and so forth.
People can't resist throwing those eggs in those chestnuts in the fire.
Has to do it. And, you know, it's funny, he's a critical thinker and everything else. He'll look beyond the literature if the literature seems like it's not making sense, but he can't, you know, this is one of those things. It's a staple. So he just takes it.
Well, it's like
NIAAA.
The other week we talked about Kurt Anderson being the most brilliant guy.
Right.
And rejecting superstition. And then he doesn't believe that George W. Bush was allowed to quit drinking on his own. Exactly. That he decided he was at a family dinner and he embarrassed himself. He didn't fall down. He made some inappropriate comments. And he told his wife, well, I'm going to quit drinking. And that was so unbelievable to Anderson. He said, well, that's called denial in AA, and that's why he bombed Iraq. Or likewise, David Brooks, another brilliant man, he announced to Sally Sotelo, and of all people, and Scott Lilienfeld, well, of course, addicts can never quit. And Sally, you know, in a 30-second intermission, she said, well, that's not true. Most of them do quit, but then they just went on. And as I said, if we talk to David Brooks next week, he still probably believe the same thing. You can't break down these ideas. While we're talking about something chemical, it takes control of your brain. Unlike food or sex or love, all of which take place in your brain too. And so, ergo, you have to believe all those addiction myths.
So when it comes to trauma, he said, you know, his advice is, let's use that as fuel. Now you have a perspective, and you can use that perspective to know a little bit more about the world around you and what it's capable of and what you're capable of, and move forward. And when it comes to addiction, he always says, well, addiction's more than just not, you know, overcoming addiction's more than just not doing something or, you know, not drinking. It's, you have to build up your life and, you know, repair the infrastructure of your life. And so he even created a program, but he still, as you say, can't help but to turn to that really simple way of describing the cycle of, you know, drug experiences. He talks about cocaine the same way. He has a few different lectures where he talks about cocaine being addictive because of, you know, dopamine, you know.
Stuff Carl said that he was drummed into his head in the 1990s.
Exactly.
And which Nora Volkow, up until about 2010, she said it's all about the dopamine. She doesn't say that anymore. Nora Volkow sounds like me now when you read her blog post. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. We're going to have an addendum where we talk about how America has been sold the lie of genetics, of addiction, which we're going to put on my YouTube channel, but it's linked to everything we're talking about.
So what I just told you about Peterson's beliefs, it's potted, but it captures the spirit of what I'm trying to get across. His beliefs and the way he talks about all of these things, from the practical to the brilliant to the sort of misled, like I just said, map on to his own experience pretty well. And so now we have him as a case study. Peterson has a history of depression that he talks about, and hyper anxiety and suicidality. He talks partly about being from Saskatchewan and having cold winters and nobody around and seemingly little purpose. So he does talk a little practically about why he was depressed, but he also talks a lot about how it's genetic and neurobiological kind of a thing. So he rose to fame and began doing these speaking tours around his book, 12 Rules for Life. And he developed, he said, a lot of anxiety because on one hand, he was being, he was getting all the death threats that you could imagine, like AOC, and he didn't know how people were going to respond when he walked down the street or recognized him. And it was just a lot for him all at once. He went from a guy that's just a pretty smart professor that people around the area know him and people at conferences might know him, but nobody else, to he was signing autographs on the street every time he walked down, or someone might give him threats. So he said that gave him a ton of anxiety, and but he wanted to pursue what he was doing, and he had a little help from benzodiazepines, which he said he took benzodiazepines, I think it was Klonopin, and it really helped him. He took a pretty low dose, and he felt pretty good on that. So he wanted to keep doing what he was doing. He probably didn't take his own advice and do his own self-authoring suite, which he could have, but given that everything was happening so quick, it worked.
Well, he might have done them together a little bit. I mean,
maybe
he was giving the speeches. He was expanding himself, and he was using chemical assistance.
That's what I mean. He used drugs to his benefit. But keep in mind that he's not. That is true. I mean, from my perspective, he was giving all these lectures, and he wanted to keep doing them, and he just felt like it's difficult to do them, and drugs gave him some benefit. So, I mean, who doesn't do that? You use drugs for a reason. In his mind, I think he's already putting the story together that I'm trying to live my purpose, but something's keeping me from doing it. It might partly be my, this depression that I have a history of. And he's got this little like neurochemical theory going on. So to him, the benzodiazepines were medicine to help him with this ailment that he has while he's trying to pursue his purpose.
Benzodiazepines were developed as a medicine for whatever that's worth. But, opioids are used as medicines, and they're used by people who decided they wanted to use them as medicines, but they didn't bother to get a prescription.
So he's already taken himself down a story, already painted a narrative about himself that he's a medical patient at this point, not a guy who's using drugs for some benefit. So maybe it's true, maybe not, but you can see that how it all pans out. I was thinking about whether to mention this or not, but his daughter, Michaela Peterson, is also the purveyor of this weird fad diet that she claims really helped her. She had a lot of medical issues and digestive issues, and she was pretty much crippled for the first 20 years of her life. And I don't know what else she did, but one of the things that she changed about her diet was she started eating only meat, salt, and water. It's all that she eats. No vegetables, no nothing else. And she says it's great and she feels better now. I don't know, but he started doing
Yomi diet's pretty popular in several places. That's the Pritikin diet as well.
So he's doing these two things, which is like, all right, let me change my diet. Let me take benzodiazepines. Then his wife, on his continued satellite rising to fame, his wife was diagnosed with cancer, which they thought was terminal. So he canceled a lot of his speaking engagements and kind of went off the map. And he started taking a lot more. He upped his benzodiazepine intake to a much larger dose because he was feeling, now he explains he was feeling suicidal. He was deeply, deeply depressed.
And he wasn't out doing as many positive things either.
Exactly. He stopped the things that he knew to be helping him in his life and giving him a sense of purpose. And his wife is his wife. I mean, this guy's wife is his wife and his best friend and his tour manager, and they do everything together. So he, like any good loving relationship, if something happens to her, it's something that's really happening to him as well. So you might think that's kind of a standard response to a tragedy like that, but somewhere along the way, he decided that these bouts of horrible depression, suicidality, he remembered when he used to kind of feel like that, similarly to how AOC was saying, well, this traumatic, people are trying to kill me right now. It kind of reminds me of the similar feelings as when I was abused when I was younger. I think Jordan Peterson was saying, uh-oh, here comes this suicidality kind of feeling again. And he related it back to, this chemical, what do you call it? This abstract biological brain thing that he has that gives him depression. I don't think maybe he would say it out loud, but I don't think he's connecting the dots that who wouldn't feel this way if something horrible like this was happening. So he was attributing the depression, suicidality to just a condition he's born with, plus benzodiazepines.
Although, like AOC, there was he was being reached. Something bad was happening to him.
Yes.
Having a negative reaction to being threatened to being killed, or having your best friend and life partner dying, it's kind of understandable.
Right. So he was thinking the Klonopins, the benzodiazepines are really making me feel this way, so I need to get off of them. So his whole thing was like, it wasn't so much the build yourself up kind of stance that he takes when he talks to people who are nihilistic and at their worst. He was thinking like the first order of business for him was to get off these drugs, and then he can kind of sort himself out, rather than let me sort myself out and see if I need these drugs to help me, or however else you might want to do it. So he was drug focused, and when he tried to get himself off of these drugs, he was going through, as you know, benzodiazepines and alcohol are quite dangerous sometimes to just quit cold turkey. They can cause seizures and even death in some experience.
And we should point out, we say it every time, and I'm going to be talking about it when I talk about the genetic thing. The Life Process program is based on the fact that the best predictors of who overcomes addiction are people who are successfully married, who are educated, who are doing well economically, who are feeling good about themselves. The more positives people have going for them, the better they are at overcoming addictions, even when they're not exactly thinking about overcoming addictions.
Right. Which is what happens in the government data that we cite all the time too, is people are overcoming their addictions, and they're not all people who are trying to go get help and overcome them. They're people who
mostly they don't get
access
help
to life. Right. So
this is a little bit technical. I was at a famous conference about self-cure of addictions. It went into a big volume. Klingeman's the editor. I was one of the people there, and believe it or not, George Valiant was there. There are two great ways of studying natural recovery. One way of studying natural recovery is to put an ad in the paper and say, if you've gotten over addiction, contact me. And the other way of studying natural recovery is to do surveys with people. And at one point, they're addicted, they're dependent by measures. And the next time, when you interview them, they're not dependent. And you get two totally different answers. The people who say, oh, I overcame an addiction, they sound like people, even if they didn't go to AA, who think that way.
Right.
Moderation management meetings bear certain similarities to AA. With people who go along in life, when they would contact them and say, can you tell us how you got over your addiction? They say, what addiction? And they say, well, you were drinking 12 drinks a day, 10 years ago. And he said, oh, yeah. They'll say, oh, that was bad. Yeah, but, I stopped drinking so much. They don't have a theory of overcoming addiction. They had a life emerge.
That was really valuable. That's a really cool way of putting it. when you're asked, hey, have you overcome an addiction, and you're the kind of person who wants to speak up, it's almost like you're forced to tell a sexy story about it, right? But if you're being surveyed about your relationship with, say, drugs, you're going to be more straightforward and not try to dress it up so much. And like you say, some people are just going to say, oh, I had an addiction. Oh yeah.
Well, you're going to think about your life. I mean, another way that Ocasio-Cortez, she's thinking about her life for the most part. And then if she was stuck in a basement office where people were trying to kill her, she got a little off track for alone in a room with the lights out for 5 hours. Your mind goes in bad directions. But her life is generally about living her life.
Right.
That's the best thing a human being can do. And it's sort of a funny thing that we're saying. We have a life process program. You know, the best thing you can do, we're talking with you, we're trying to help you, you've come to us for help, is to live your life. That's the single best thing you can do.
So AOC was life first, trauma in the back of her mind. And Jordan Peterson in this case is sort of, well, he's kind of undergoing several traumatic events at once, but his focus is, okay, what do I get rid of first to make me feel better? Let's get rid of the drugs. So every doctor he went to, because they were worried about the effects that, completely just getting off the drug might have, they wanted, as is pretty standard, to taper him off. But he didn't want to wait. He was thinking, well, I need to get off these drugs now. So he wanted to be just drug free. He went, because no one would do that. No one in Canada or the US would do that. So he went to Russia, where they'll just do what you want. They put him in a drug-induced coma and did a rapid detox from the drugs.
Wow.
So after that, he was out of commission. I mean, for an entire year. He says he's come back because he was partway through writing his book at around that time. His wife miraculously made a full recovery. So that's been a boon.
Here he was worried about something, got addicted, and went into a medically induced coma, and the thing he was worried about got better.
Sorted itself out. Not that that's a typical thing to happen, but yeah, luckily. So his wife is still in total remission. So he was at it, but his health was so bad after that. He still has tremors and bouts of anxiety and things to deal with.
Has it hurt his career? I mean, are people less willing to listen to his good advice now, or how?
We've got to see, because I think he just published his next book, and so we'll see what happens. But he's certainly not, I mean, I guess because of COVID, no one's doing this, but he's not really as active anymore. Once in a while, he'll do an interview here and there. But, I could imagine that his wife having that hard of a time, and then she recovered, and then he doesn't go into a drug-induced coma, that he might just kind of bounce back. I don't know, but I would imagine that the reason he's not bouncing back, and that people don't hear from him all so often, is because, he did this to himself. And I don't know what the procedure was like, but don't you think that if he tapered himself off of, first of all, I kind of want to know if this might be split the crowd here, but if benzodiazepines were working to get him through certain periods of his life, and I don't know, maybe they weren't, wouldn't you think, why would you really need to stop taking them at that moment? And on the other hand, if he really wanted to get off of them and he tapered off of them, I would guess that he probably wouldn't be having tremors and be worried about seizures at this point.
Well, didn't you, after you had a very bad experience with heroin and fentanyl, didn't you sort of not quit right away, but you kind of got off the concept of heroin? And if somebody were describing it, they would say you were tapering, but you didn't know enough to taper exactly. You took less, and then you were younger.
Yeah. Yeah, you hit it on the head. Yeah, exactly. I took less. I was worried about the potential of dying. So I thought, what's the right amount for me to take that I get some positive experience, but I could still be careful. And then it kind of turned out that, as you say, life got in the way, luckily, and I thought more about that than heroin.
Although there's some people that take heroin for a really long time, and I mean, that's the new revelation. I mean, Carl Hart, you interviewed, you know, and Will's doing this on Filter. You know, people take drugs, and that's what Carl Hart says. We have to have people reveal. We know people take drugs. We do these national surveys, and people are taking drugs. And very few of them show up in treatment, and very few of them are impaired and distressed by them. They're coming to grips with them, but we don't recognize that that's one possible outcome.
Right.
And he felt, for whatever reason, maybe it was the negative experiences, I don't know, that he had to quit them entirely. I know a pretty famous guy. I can't use all the stories I know by name. I know a pretty famous guy who was a famous meth freak. And he went to jail. And he drinks now, so he uses that as an argument against, you know, the disease theory. But one night when we went out for dinner, he said to me, well, you know, when I'm really going to a big meeting and I have something to do, you know, I still take some Ritalin or something, which is the same chemical structure as meth.
Yeah.
I said, you know, that's a little more interesting than the fact that you used to be a meth head freak and you went to prison and now you drink. The fact that you still take meth-like amphetamines. He said, well, I can't tell anybody that. And I said,
right.
Well,
speaking of not being able to tell anybody that, practical truth. So Peterson all in the spotlight, and then all of a sudden not. People wanted to know what was going on. So he's come back, and now he adds content to his YouTube channel and gave this explanation that I just gave to you. Maybe he would say it a little bit differently. I don't know. And the press jumped on that. And of course, you can guess what they want to say about this. It's the benzodiazepines' fault. And so the tagline and so many different titles and documents and the articles that are written and videos that are made is that, you know, benzodiazepines, the secret or the hidden epidemic. This is the Independent, National Post, Daily Mail, several YouTube channels and radio hosts that pride themselves on being critical thinkers.
Now, you know, that's been done. There was a famous bestseller written by a woman, I'm Dancing as Fast as I Can, which revealed her benzodiazepine addiction.
Oh, okay.
This is now 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And everybody said, oh my God, you know, tranquilizers can be addictive. Of course, millions of people were taking tranquilizers. So like everything else, it can be addictive. And she became addicted. Her name was Gordon. But for a lot of people, they aren't.
And even if this isn't, I mean, even if this is done before under the benzodiazepine tag, this has been done before, as you know. This is done every year, every decade with some different kind of drug. So even Robert Whitaker, who I've interviewed before, and I really like Robert Whitaker. He's wrote Mad in America and Anatomy of an Epidemic, where he says psychiatrists always want to prescribe drugs, but, you know, it's more than, first of all, drugs can do you some harm if you're taking them and you don't have the right relationship with them. But on the other hand, in addition to that, you want to sort your life issues out in a more practical, maybe therapeutic kind of a way. This is his argument, more of a therapeutic way. So let's quit thinking glorifying drugs or demonizing drugs. But Robert Whitaker's interviewed on some of these channels, and he's saying he's feeding into the benzodiazepine as a hidden epidemic. And his whole thing is just like with opioids in the past 10 years, he says, well, doctors are overprescribing them. And so it's just the new opioid epidemic is benzodiazepine.
He's a great guy, Robert Whitaker. And by the way, there's a new the history of addiction on their website, Mad in America, which, you know, a man I know named Gallagher, and it gives a good burst about my work. So Robert Whitaker's done a valuable service. He is a drug determinist, you know, and even Mad in America, it's about, well, psychiatric drugs are bad for you because they ruin your brain. He is a he's a pretty reductive guy. I mean, his
Mm.
background is journalism, not medicine. So
So-
I do find myself drawing back when I hear him tell stories a lot of times.
Right. So here we go again. We have a brilliant individual who knows better than to get lost in standard stories, but he can't help throw all of his knowledge out the window in favor of the easy story that the drug is causing problems. So we already kind of went through some of this, but I just want to put a tag in for what we believe the life process program in relation to this story. We may have already done it. Maybe I might even cut it out. We'll see. But for one, people often believe that benzos or other antidepressants are necessary in order to get rid of their anxiety or depression. And we say, okay, take drugs and put that option on the table, especially if they help you. Take drugs, and if they give you benefit, why would we?
And we
no
would
to
throw
that?
speed drugs in the pile too, meth,
Yeah.
amphetamines, and coke. There's
Right.
kind of
We wouldn't make the distinction between they need to be prescribed or
but
not.
those
They
are
just
all
need to be
drugs
safe.
that are all of them are increasing deaths now.
Yeah. But we don't think they're going to solve your problems on the basis that they're fixing wiring in the brain, and that's something crucial that people can't get to that other side of the equation sometimes. And we acknowledge that people can become addicted to any drugs, and withdrawals from benzodiazepines can certainly be deadly, but that doesn't make them especially insidious, I wouldn't say. I mean, the withdrawals from alcohol could be deadly, and alcohol sold legally in stores everywhere. During the pandemic, I was so happy that I could get a much larger dose of alcohol than I'd been taking in the previous months. So the big difference between the two is just that one's prescribed as medicine and the other's sold legally in the market in grocery stores. And most people still have no problem with alcohol. And if they run into problems, they kick the problems. And we
have a general, the thing that nobody can explain, I'm taking a little bit of this material from the other session I'm going to do for my YouTube session. We're doing worse with addiction all the time. Deaths are now up to 82,000. That's the latest figure annually. They've increased steadily since the year 2000. The brain disease theory was published in 1997. Nora Volkow headed the NIDA in 2003. And the Drug Policy Alliance was created in the year 2000. All of our focus on addiction, all that we learn about addiction, it's hurting us. So I'm just going to read, this is Nora Volkow. With what Nora Volkow has become tremendously defensive. And she's trying to explain why most people who take drugs don't become addicted and why most people outgrow it. With the brain, and she's defending the brain disorder model within the larger biosocial, psychosocial framework, captures better than other models, such as those that focus on addiction as a learned behavior, is a crucial dimension of interindividual biological variability that makes some people more susceptible than others to this hijacking. Many people try drugs, but most do not start to use compulsively or develop an addiction. Studies are identifying gene variants that confer resilience or risk for addiction, as well as environmental factors in life. But that leaves out the main thing about addiction, which she also talks about elsewhere. With all those biosocial factors making people addicted, how come people overcome addiction regularly? And the one guy who does that statistically is a man named Gene Heyman. And he talks about the fact that the same percentage of people quit addiction at every phase. Most quit because most are addicted or dependent in their 20s. Well, the famous people we know, Maya Salovitz and Mark Lewis, they got done by their 20s or when they're 30. But whoever's remaining, the same number drops off all along. You can't explain that genetically. Heyman, the correlates of quitting include the absence of additional psychiatric and medical problems, marital status, singles stay addicted longer, economic pressures, fear of judicial sanctions, concern about respect from children and other family members. Hard to find a gene for that. Worries about the many problems that attend regular involvements in illegal activities, more years spent in school and higher income. I mean, Peterson got over his addiction, and he's a guy who would get over his addiction because he had so many positives going for him. They are not correlates of recovery from the disease addiction is said to be, such as they're not those when people get over, you don't get over Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, diabetes, heart disease, and cancer because you have a good marriage, more education, better work skills, and because you're trying to gain the respect of your children.
Right.
They're trying to fit, what my talk on YouTube is going to be. I'm beginning to refer to it as the big lie. The disease theory is the big lie about addiction. I'm likening it explicitly to the big lie that Trump and his colleagues told about him not losing the election. It has negative consequences. Conceiving of addiction as a disease that's bred into you genetically, that's what Volko's saying, and to some extent that's what Peterson's saying, or it's maintained by the drug itself. It has negative consequences, and we're seeing the negative consequences.
We, like Carl Hart, who just wrote that book, his slogan is very well put: drugs aren't the problem. I mean, of course, you would like to go on to say, well, what is the problem? And we should be talking about that. But at least suffice it to say, drugs aren't, and relationships with drugs maybe could be a problem, and over-reliance on a drug instead of, reliance on your own skills.
And Gene Heyman's laying out all the things that cause the problem. Well, if you don't have intimate relationships, if you don't have an education, if you don't feel good about yourself, if you have emotional problems, if you're not getting the respect of your children, and we're saying those are the things that naturally, to some extent, you're going to address, and that we're in Life Process Program going to help you address.
Drug addiction, an addiction is always the result of a lack of an engagement with life.
And it's a lack of connection to life and a lack of engagement. And sometimes, as with Peterson, that's his name, right? Peterson?
Mm-hmm.
It can happen to people who previously have been doing okay. The most famous case of depression in America for a long time was a novelist, and he wrote a book about darkness that beset him. He wrote Sophie's Choice. He had never been depressed. He drank regularly every night and listened to classical music. And then for reasons he said in the book that had nothing to do with like his worrying about alcohol, he had to quit drinking. It was some kind of physical reaction. And he immediately fell into a tremendously deep depression. So people have a way of organizing their lives that works for them. They're productive. And then sometimes they do fall off a ditch or they fall into a problem. It can happen to the best of us.
Let me just end here. I'd say the moral of Peterson's whole story here for us, besides what we will add about life engagement and how maybe he could have reacted in a positive way, or what maybe would have happened if he let things play out a little bit. Even great psychologists, brilliant minds, Gerd Anderson, as you mentioned, they'll abandon their best thinking when it comes to drugs. And they can't help but recite standard drugs or, drug addict people stories. They recite them to themselves, to the extent that they create narratives around themselves that are actually self-fulfilling in a negative way, and they recite them to the public. And they do it because it's just too hard to root out complex problems in a truthful way, even though really the ameliorative factor of when you overcome an addiction is just basic common sense and pro-social life. And of course, it's just too easy to tell fairy tales and simple stories. So,
and we love medical solutions. But the person I was talking about was William Styron, and the book was called Darkness Visible, a memoir of madness. It was written, first edition was 1990. We have more in America than anywhere else. We like to feel there's a medical solution for every problem, and that's the real science of it. So I think we've done about an hour on this. Let's
you
summed it up nicely, and you brought it back into the bailiwick of where we talk about it.
Yeah. So let's sign off on this one. We'll create another video, which I'll link to at the end here. So I wanted to say to everybody, including AOC and Jordan Peterson, we wish them well and a happy Sunday.